One of the most powerful methods that we have for monitoring the well-being of a child is a tool called growth monitoring. Growth monitoring is done all over the world, and when we do it, we're measuring 3 variables. So firstly, we're measuring the weight of a child, and that's usually recorded at birth, especially if there's a health professional with a scale nearby. Secondly, we monitor the length, or later when the baby is standing, the height of that child. And finally, we measure the head circumference. All of these variables together give us a sense of how well that child is growing and sort of a picture of their overall health. So let's start by looking at one of these variables, weight. I'm going to be using a typical South African weight for age growth chart. And in this chart, we can see weight in kilograms on the y-axis, and age is found along the bottom, along the x-axis. And you'll notice that there are these different colored lines on the chart. The green line in the middle is called the median. So this means that about half of all South African children will fall above this line, and about half will fall below it. The orange lines that are labeled -2 and +2 are sort of like the outer limits of where we want to see healthy children fall on this chart. So a child who is 18 months old and weighs 10 kilograms would be plotted here. I'll plot this child in blue. The most important thing to remember is that a single data point like this doesn't really tell us much about a child's overall health. Ideally, a child's growth is measured or tracked over time, and it's the trend in growth that helps us understand how well that child is doing. So imagine we had a different child, and I'll plot this child in purple, and imagine that this child came in for their 1-year clinic visit, weighing 8 kilograms. And then perhaps at 14 months, that child was weighed again and had put on 0.5 kilograms, so 1/2 of a kilogram. And so that child was now plotted at 8.5 kilograms. Maybe that child was sick with pneumonia at the age of 16 months, so his weight at that visit was still 8.5 kilograms. Often a drop-off in a child's weight is seen during a short-term or acute illness. Usually children don't eat as well when they're sick, and their metabolism also speeds up because illness is like a stress. So they're burning more calories and taking in fewer. But then, let's say this child recovers fully and at 18 months is actually back on track, a little over 9 kilograms. So I'll plot that here. Now, if you compare just these 2 children at 18 months, and if you looked at just these 2 data points, you might think that this child is healthier or growing better than the purple child at 18 months, right? But what if I told you that our blue friend had weighed 10 kilograms at 1 year of age and hadn't gained any weight in the past 6 months? And then what if I told you that at the 20-month visit, this child had just gained 1/2 of a kilogram? Then, even though this child is higher up on the growth curve than this child, his pattern of growth is much more concerning because this child is tracking nicely along his growth curve while this one is falling off of his ideal curve. And in fact, he's crossing over lines from higher to lower, which can be a real cause for concern, especially after about 2 years of age, when a healthy child's growth usually begins to follow one curve. Crossing of lines can indicate a health problem. This child, on the other hand, has consistently been tracking just above the -2 line. So it may be that this is just a constitutionally small child. Maybe his parents are smaller people, or there's some other reason that this is a small but healthy child. Having said that, a steady curve doesn't always mean that a child is healthy. So a child who is tracking steadily but is on or below the red line is very likely to be in trouble. Remember that we like to see children fall somewhere between these 2 orange lines. In the new South African Road to Health book, the focus isn't just on weight for age, but also on height for age. This is the South African height or length for age chart. And on this graph, we see length or height in centimeters along the y-axis, and age, again, along the x-axis at the bottom. For height, we also like to see children growing steadily as they get older. But an important distinction between these two growth curves is that a short-term or acute illness, like our purple friend here who had pneumonia, will often result in an acute fall-off in weight. But only after long-standing or chronic illness will a child's height drop off. And malnutrition in childhood can be considered a long-standing illness. So when a child doesn't receive enough nutritious foods to eat in the first years of life, that child can become growth stunted, which means that their height doesn't follow the growth curve that represents their full potential for growth. Growth stunting is still a serious problem in South Africa, so the fact that the new Road to Health book recommends routine monitoring of height for age is really a step in the right direction towards reducing growth stunting. But why is growth monitoring such a powerful tool? Well, in many countries, growth monitoring allows for a subtle reallocation of the family's resources to support a child who's not growing well. Even in families who are struggling with very few resources, when their child is identified as being underweight for age, the family will often manage to subtly redistribute their income to support that child's nutrition. Secondly, if there are sources of external aid available to a community, growth monitoring and identifying children who are failing to thrive or who are not growing well, this will allow for targeted distribution of that aid toward the children who need it most. And finally, growth monitoring serves as a form of education for the whole community. It makes parents and caregivers aware of the importance of adequate nutrition in order for a child to grow to reach their full potential. I use the term failure to thrive, and the abbreviation for that is FTT. Failure to thrive is the term used to describe a child who's not growing well, and there are two types of failure to thrive: organic and non-organic. The first type, organic failure to thrive, is the less common type. In organic failure to thrive, something is physically wrong with the child's body such that they can't take in or absorb the nutrients in their food. For example, my middle child has celiac disease. That's a disorder where the child's gut loses the ability to absorb the nutrients in his food. So when my son was 3 years old, we began to notice that he wasn't gaining any weight from one doctor's visit to the next. And later that year, we noticed that his height was also plateauing. So he was falling off of his growth curve. And after he was diagnosed, we started him on a special gluten-free diet that allowed his gut to heal, and now his growth is back on track. But remember that organic failure to thrive of this kind is much, much less common. Non-organic failure to thrive is the much more common problem, and the most common cause of non-organic failure to thrive around the world is malnutrition due to poverty. In non-organic failure to thrive, the child doesn't grow well because something is wrong with the environment in which the child is growing. For example, there's not enough money for food, or the child isn't being cared for properly. Preventing non-organic failure to thrive involves coordinated efforts, including things like empowering families and communities with health education, protecting and supporting mothers who care for young children, and advocating for increased access to resources for families with young children. South Africa's children are the future leaders of the country, so investing in their health and their growth is investing in a better future for all South Africans.